Father Maurice is the Executive Director for the Black and Indian Mission Office in Washington, D.C. Father Sands is also a priest of the Archdiocese of Detroit. He's a full-blooded Native American growing up on a beautiful island located in the St. Clair River, just north of Detroit. He's a member of the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi tribes, and he is an enrolled member of the Little Traverse Bands of Ottawa Indians. Father Sands also serves as a consultant to the USCCB Subcommittee on Native American Affairs, as a consultant to the USCCB's Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism, and as an ex officio board member of the Tekakwitha Conference. Father Sands' work is focused on supporting ministry programs that serve African American Catholics and Native American Catholics in dioceses across the United States. He travels throughout the year to visit parishes, schools, diocesan ministry offices, and national organizations that serve African American and Native Americans. Father Sands has a particular interest in supporting and strengthening Catholic schools that serve African American and Native American communities. Please join me in welcoming Father Henry Sands.
Ani bonjour. Father Henry Sands, Dejnakaz, Wabanosa, Dejnakaz, Bekashanan Dojiva, Ajijak and Doda, Managishiga Chimiwech, Kashanadu. So, it's our custom when we speak to people to address people in our own language. So, my language is the language of the Anishinaabe people, and we call the language Anishinaabe. And so I was just saying, my name is Father Henry Sands, and my native name is Wabanosa, which means to walk by the eastern light. And I was saying that I'm from a First Nation community, which is near Detroit. It's called Bekashwanam, which means where the waters divide, because we live on a group of islands that form the delta of the St. Clair River. And I belong to the Crane clan, and just saying, today's a good day, and thank you, Lord, for this good day. And I am very blessed and honored to be here with you today, and I was blessed that Lenore met me yesterday evening, took me out for dinner, took me on a tour of the area. We went to the Veering, and so I was able to have whitefish and a Euchre beer. Blessed to be able to partake of the best that Marquette has to offer, among other good things, I'm sure, that I could also partake of and participate in. So I'm really glad to be here, and I thought that I would tell you a little bit about myself before I begin to speak about Bishop Baraga, Venerable Bishop Frederic Baraga, and I'm sure that there are probably lots of people here who know a lot more about him, but because he was an apostle to the Native peoples who live in the Great Lakes area, I think that it's a good opportunity for me to give thanks to this hero of so many people, to give thanks to this wonderful disciple of Jesus Christ, wonderful priest and bishop who dedicated his life to proclaiming the gospel and did it very well, receiving the call by the Lord to do so, receiving many graces and using the gifts that the Lord gave him, and just pouring out his life tirelessly, to fulfill this mission the Lord gave him. So one thing that I could say about him before I begin speaking about him in my presentation is that the first Native community that he served in, at the time was known in French as La Croche. It's actually where the people of the Little Traverse Band of Ottawa Indians live, which is the tribe to which I belong. So, that offers me a very special connection to this really great man. And my ancestors are from different parts of Michigan. My 4 grandparents were all Native American. My father's father is from the Traverse City area, which is where the Grand Traverse Band of Chippewa Indians is located. We're actually from the Leelanau Peninsula, and I think that a lot of you know that on the Leelanau Peninsula there are a lot of big sand dunes, and that's where my name comes from. My last name is Sands, S-A-N-D-S, and it was translated in the early 1830s from Ojibwe. Our name was, in Ojibwe was actually Chinego. Nego means sands, and our name was Chinego, which means great sands, because we came from this area with the big sand dunes on the Leelanau Peninsula, and there's still a native community there. There's a parish there, St. Kateri Parish. It's had different names over the years, but it's been there for a long time. And if you go visit the cemetery at the parish, you'll see a lot of tombstones with my last name, which is Sands, and before it was Sands. And Chinego was also known as Yana, and you can see lots of the tombstones with that same name. So that's where my father's father comes from. My father's mother was Pokagon Potawatomi, which is in the southwestern part of Michigan, and the Pokagon Potawatomi offered land to the University of Notre Dame when it was founded, and the Catholic missionaries were very active in that area also for a long time. My mother's father is Little Traverse Odawa, which I've mentioned to you already, which is on the Little Traverse Bay near Petoskey and Harbor Springs. In French, it was known as La Croche, but in the Odawa language we call it Wasaksing, which means crooked tree, so that's the name of the community. And then my mother's mother was from the Saginaw Chippewa tribe, which is in the middle of the Lower Peninsula near Mount Pleasant, Michigan. So those are my Native American roots. And I'm really grateful that because Bishop Baraga and other missionaries came to Michigan beginning in the middle of the 1600s. My ancestors were introduced to the gospel mostly in the 1700s, but we've had Catholic Christian roots for a long time. So I'm very glad that all of these wonderful priests and brothers and sisters, were inspired to come and to bring the gospel and to serve the people who live in this part of the world. I went to the University of Michigan when I finished high school, and when I was in my first year there, I took a course in the Ojibwe language, and the dictionary that we use is the dictionary that Bishop Baraga wrote of our language, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a while. And Len was telling me last night that since he originally wrote the dictionary that has been revised, but that the center here is underway with efforts to try to publish the original dictionary again. And I believe that the dictionary I have is a copy of the original one that he wrote. I still have it, but it's in storage somewhere over the years. I've moved lots of times, and so I have some things that I've kept in storage over the years, and that dictionary is one of them. So I'm hoping one is that I can find it. And he did this really great work to write the first dictionary of the Ojibwe language, and also he wrote a book on grammar. He wrote the Mass in Ojibwe. He wrote various prayer books as well. But that was probably my first introduction to Bishop Baraga when I started at the University of Michigan, took the Ojibwe language course, and we used the dictionary that he wrote. Also, I'm just going to say one more thing about myself, and then I'll begin to speak about Bishop Baraga. When I went to Ann Arbor and started studying at the University of Michigan, I had a very profound experience of the Lord inviting me to make a really big commitment of my life to Him, and I didn't really want to do it, but He was very persistent, and over a period of time, I don't know how long it was 2, 3, or 4 weeks, He wore me down, and I finally decided to do it. And I actually left home thinking, I'm going to go to university, I'm going to be a little bit wild and crazy because I grew up with really strict parents. God obviously has something different in mind. So I had this experience, charismatic experience, profound experience with the Lord, coming to me and inviting me to, make a commitment of myself to Him, which I decided to do, not knowing what I was doing and still having some doubts about it all, but I made that act of faith that He asked me to make. And it prepared me then to meet people who were part of a charismatic community in Ann Arbor. It's called the Word of God community, very large community, was part of a large network of charismatic communities, and many people who were in these communities have become priests and religious sisters, religious brothers, theologians, working in dioceses, working in seminaries, doing lots of really great work on behalf of the church. So a lot of good fruit, was born from that work that God did to form these charismatic communities, and I'm a fruit of the work that God did there. So I'm really grateful for that. So I don't think I could say a lot more about myself, but except I will say that the Lord began to call me to the priesthood in 1996, and I was actually 40 years of age. And I decided that, yes, I can do this. And I initially wanted to be a religious priest, but he made it clear to me that he wanted me to enroll in the seminary in Detroit when I went on a discernment weekend. I was living in Toronto, went on a discernment weekend, just thinking I'm checking it off the list. It's not for me, I'm not interested. But the moment I arrived at the door of the seminary, Detroit Sacred Heart Major Seminary, I just had this really profound experience. That's what God wanted me. So I enrolled in the seminary in 1999, and I was ordained for the priesthood in 2005. So when I was ordained, I was 49 years old. So my first question in the next life, or one of the first, will be, why the Lord called me so late to the priesthood. I would like to believe that if he had called me sooner, I would have said yes. But he called me when he called me, and I'm very happy, to be a priest. It's a really wonderful life, and I have the opportunity to assist the Lord in his work of salvation and to bring Christ to the people that need him, and to bring Christ to him. So I'll leave it at that for just telling you some about myself. So what I want to do is talk, about Bishop Baraga in biographical terms, just to provide basic information about his life. But I also want to share from this book that's on the table that the Bishop Baraga Association has over there. It's called The Life of Bishop Baraga. It was written by a priest who was a Franciscan, and it provides a lot of detailed information about his book. I never read the book before, but I really learned a whole lot about him. I think that we all know that he was a really incredible man, really gifted, very, heroic in his offering of himself to the Lord and to his people. So I want to share some excerpts from the book as well. So Bishop Baraga was born in Slovenia in, I'm not even getting the date near here, in the early 1800s. I'll get the date in a moment, but he was the fourth of 5 children. His mother inherited the estate of his father when he died, and his mother died when her father died, and his mother died in 1808, his father died in 1812. So they died when he was young, and so he lived with a professor who was at the Diocesan Seminary that was near his home. He grew up in Europe during the time of the Napoleonic Wars, when France took over the lands where his family lived, the Slovenian lands. They were prior to that part of the Austrian Empire. So while he was growing up, the languages that he had to speak changed several times, and I'm really confident that God gave him a really great gift for languages, but because he also had to learn different languages at a young age, that also helped him, when he came here to learn the languages of the native peoples that he learned here. So it says that in 1816, he entered the University of Vienna and studied law. He graduated in 1821, but then he began to think about the priesthood. So at the age of 26, he was ordained as a Roman Catholic priest on September 21st, 1823, at St. Nicholas Cathedral. The bishop of the local diocese ordained him. His name was Augustine Johann Gruber, and his first assignment was at a parish called St. Martin's. And then in 1830, he responded to a request by Bishop Frederic, who was the bishop of Cincinnati, who was looking for priests who could serve as missionaries. And Bishop Frederic had responded to this organization that had been created in Europe that had the purpose of trying to promote missionary assignments for priests here in the Americas. So it was called the Leopoldine Society, and I just wanted to share a little bit about it. In the year 1829, the society was organized in Vienna, Austria, which had for its avowed object the supporting of the North American missions. The society, called the Leopoldine Society, was approved by Pope Leo XII, who 11 days before his death issued in his favor an apostolic brief. And then the Archduke Rudolf, Prince Archbishop in Austria, also appointed the Prince Archbishop of Vienna to be the representative of the society. So they helped a lot to encourage young men in Europe to become priests and then become missionaries here in the Americas. And Bishop Frederic, who was in Cincinnati, helped them to bring priests over. So Father Baraga saw the establishment of the society, and it made him decide that he wanted to become a missionary here to serve the native peoples here in the Americas. So he came to Cincinnati in 1831, and he initially began to work with German immigrants, because there were a lot of German immigrants in the Cincinnati area. And at the same time, he was studying the Odawa language because he intended to come to Michigan. And in 1831, in May of 1831, he was sent to serve at La Croche, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the community where the Odawa Indians live over by Little Traverse Bay in the lower peninsula. So he began to work there, spent 2 years and 4 months, and during that time he baptized 547 adults and children. And then a priest who was a redemptorist came to replace him, because he then went to the area which is now Grand Rapids, Michigan, and began to serve among the Odawa people there. And I want to share a little bit about his experiences, how the work that he did, and the very openness of people of the gospel, but also talk a little bit about the conditions that he found when the people got there, because they were very much in need of the gospel. So he went to Grand Rapids, and he began to physically build a church and a school and a residence. But the buildings that were put up were very poorly constructed. The materials were whatever they could find, and a lot of the buildings were built by the native peoples themselves, who didn't have a lot of carpentry tools. But they put up the buildings, and they began their work as a mission. And he was there for a couple of years, and then he was succeeded by a Hungarian priest who he met, who went to visit that mission, which was in present-day Grand Rapids, and the Hungarian priest expressed an interest in staying there. So then Father Baraga decided that he wanted to then move to La Pointe, Wisconsin. And he went there in 1835 in July, and he spent 8 years there. During the time, it says that he baptized 981 people, and then he published a book in the Odawa language in 1837, which was a Catholic catechism and prayer book. And then in 1843, he moved to Lance and began to serve in Lance on the 24th of October, and spent 10 years working as a missionary in this area, and we'll see in the UP. But he wasn't just serving the native people here, he served everybody who was living here, everyone who was Catholic. And at the same time that he was serving here, then they began to mine iron and copper. So a lot of German and French and other European immigrants began to move into the area. The population began to grow, and Bishop Baraga traveled long distances to visit all the different communities that he was serving. So it was during the time that he was here at UP that he got the name of being the snowshoe priest. And I wanted to share a little bit about what he said when he first began to serve and travel around on horseshoes. I've said that before, horseshoes, snowshoes. So what he says is, he's talking about traveling on horseshoes again, snowshoes, and then he says, in this connection, I will explain how a missionary has to travel during winter in this Indian country. In winter, a person cannot travel otherwise than on foot. As the snow is generally deep and there are no traveled roads, the only way is to travel on snowshoes. These snowshoes are from 4 to 5 feet long and 1 foot wide, and are tied to one's feet. With them, a man can travel even the deepest snow without sinking in very much. But this style of walking is very tiresome. especially for Europeans who are not accustomed to it. When a person must walk upon such snowshoes all day long, and that for many days in succession, especially in those trackless North American forests, he cannot travel without extreme fatigue and almost total exhaustion. So I know that for me, and probably for a lot of people, you think about, traveling on snowshoes seems kind of romantic, it's like recreation, the way that people do it nowadays, but, it was a necessary mode of getting around, but it was also very demanding. You had to get really strong, and, if you think about it, traveling in the winter, it was snowing and there were blizzards and stuff, it wasn't very pleasant. And if I get time, I want to share about another incident in which he almost lost his life because he had to travel a long distance in a really bad storm, but he kept going, and, by God's grace, he made it. So he, did a lot of work to codify the language of the Ojibwe people, writing the first dictionary, writing the first book of grammar, and he, wrote, the Mass in the Ojibwe language, and wrote lots of prayer books and hymns. And a lot of the prayers that he wrote and a lot of the hymns that he wrote are still, being used today among the Ojibwe people who are Catholic and even those who are Protestant. So he made so many great contributions to helping, the Native peoples to be fully Catholic, to be who they are, to be able to worship in their own language, to sing songs in their own language, offer prayers in their own language. So, we're really, really grateful for that. So in 1853, on the 29th of July, the northern peninsula of the UP was separated from the Diocese of Detroit, and it was erected into a vicariate apostolic, first of all, I should say, into a diocese, and Father Baraga was appointed as the first bishop of the Diocese of Sault Ste. Marie, which is today the Diocese of Marquette. He was consecrated in the Cathedral of Cincinnati by Archbishop Purcell. Bishop LaFau of Detroit was there. Bishop Penny of Milwaukee, they were both the co-consecrators. And after he was ordained as a bishop, he issued immediately 2 circulars to the people of the new diocese, one in English and one in Ojibwe. And at the time that the diocese was created, the jurisdiction extended not only to the whole of the UP, but also to a good portion of the Lower Peninsula, the northern part of the Lower Peninsula, to northern Wisconsin, and to the North Shore of Lake Superior, extending even into Canada. So he worked for more than 15 years in the diocese, traveling, constantly, as soon as the weather was good. It was much easier to travel, but even traveling around in the wintertime on snowshoes. And then on the 23rd of October, 1865, the see of the diocese was moved from Sault Ste. Marie to Marquette. And he speaks a little bit about that in this book, and I just wanted to share that. So this is when the see of the diocese was moved from Sault Ste. Marie to here in Marquette, and he's saying the reason of this removal is the greater facility of communicating with my missionaries. This place, Sault Ste. Marie, is an out-of-the-way place with which during 5 months from the end of November till the beginning of May, there is no communication possible except by traveling on foot with snowshoes. Navigation is impossible on account of the ice and roads. There are none here for horses. The letters we write during winter have to be carried by mail carriers who are obliged to travel on snowshoes hundreds of miles through frightful forests before they come to a station whence a person can travel with a horse. When I write in winter to a missionary at Lake Superior, I cannot expect an answer in less than 2 months. It takes 1 month for the letter to get to the missionary and another month for the answer to come to me. And this will never get better here. They will never build wagon roads here on account of the horrible desolateness and poorness of the land. It's a long time ago. And on account of the great distances from settled places. It is quite different now at Lake Superior. I say now, for 10 or 12 years ago, the Lake Superior country was as yet but little settled. At present, public roads have been built everywhere on which a person can travel and ride in summer as well as in winter. There are railroads there which are in operation, and others are being constructed. Hence, I removed my episcopal see from this lonesome Sault Ste. Marie to Marquette, which is far more favored. So that just describes, his thinking when he decided to move the diocese headquarters from Sault Ste. Marie to Marquette. Just a little kind of bit of trivia. When bishops are ordained, they're assigned to a see, a diocese that is no longer in existence, and the honorary titular see of Archbishop Bigram, who is in Detroit, is the Diocese of Sault Ste. Marie. I just wanted to let you know that. Yeah. So, half an hour. So, those are kind of the basic facts about his life. It's incredible that he learned about this Leopoldine society that was encouraging young men and priests to go to the Americas to serve as missionaries, and he had a great desire to do that, and he came here, and he was a very effective missionary. He served not only the native peoples that live in the Great Lakes area, but also everybody else wherever he was assigned, serving the people very well. He was a man that lived a very simple life. He didn't desire material possessions at all. He was a very devout man, spending a lot of time in prayer, and he worked really hard to provide resources for the people that he served. He often made appeals for funds in Europe. He made appeals for funds here in the United States when he wrote various books and prayer books and other things that he wrote. He looked to many different places to raise the money so that they could get published. And then, he published books in Wisconsin, he published books in Detroit, he published books in Europe. Wherever he could find a place, to get, these resources created to make them available to the people of God. He's just, incredible, hardworking, resourceful, prayerful, holy. Didn't think about himself at all. And all of us, are beneficiaries of the legacy of the work that he did as a priest and as a bishop. So we can be very grateful for that. And for all of you, he is the first bishop of your diocese. He is a man whose life has been examined and presented to Rome as a man of heroic virtue. He's a man who has been recognized by the church as a servant of God. When his cause was opened by the diocese, then he became servant of God, and the people working on his cause submitted his positio to Rome, which is the report that tells about his life, and the congregation, which is now they're not called dicasteries. The dicastery has accepted the positio, and so he is now venerable. And Len's going to talk about the cause, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. But you're so blessed to have this great holy man who lived here and served, and who whose remains are upstairs, and who is a great hero of the faith, who is a very holy, saintly man, who is with the Lord, who is praying for all of you. So you can be very grateful for that, and I also feel that he is able to fulfill that same role in my life, and I'm really grateful for it. So I wanted to also say that prior to his coming, that beginning in the middle of the 1600s, that there were various missionaries who passed through this area, and none of the work that they did endured for a long time. It wasn't until Bishop Baraga came along that communities of faith, Catholic missions, Catholic parishes were established and endured. And I have to think that that's just according to God's providence. But all of you, I believe, would know about the North American martyrs, the Jesuits who served mostly in New York State and in Ontario, and several of them who were martyred in the 1600s. And a couple of them came here to Michigan with the intention of serving as missionaries. And I want to read the account of their coming here, and you'll see why they ended up not not actually being able to fulfill that interest and desire they had to serve here. So it says that the first missionaries that ever visited the Northwest, they called this the Northwest Territory at the time in which they lived, and they came here. The first missionaries that ever visited the Northwest were Father Isaac Jogues and Charles Ramboll of the illustrious Society of Jesus. About the middle of October 1642, these two intrepid missionaries arrived at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Some 2,000 Indians from all parts of the Northwest were assembled there to celebrate the Feast of the Dead. The fathers were well received and requested to stay there. They told the Indians that they might establish a missionary station at that place, provided the latter were disposed to receive instruction. A council was held, at the conclusion of which the Indians assured the fathers that they greatly desired the happiness of having them in their midst, that they would embrace them as brothers and profit by their words. However, as the fathers were needed more pressingly elsewhere, they departed, intending, no doubt, to establish a mission there later on. That same year, 1642, Father Jogues was captured by a roving band of Iroquois with René Goupil and Francois Couture. They were most cruelly tortured, and René Goupil was shortly afterwards tomahawked by the side of Jogues. 4 years later, October 18, 1846, the latter was treacherously killed at the Indian village of Ganawage, which is today Mauriceville, New York, where they have the shrine to the North American martyrs. And here it says steps have been taken looking to the beatification. They're now saints, but at the time the book was written, they were only beginning to be considered as candidates for sainthood. And they also say that at the same time there was a Native American caretaker who was also being considered for sainthood, and she's also now a saint. So after these two missionaries came to Michigan, there were other missionaries who were Jesuit and otherwise. Father Gregory Richard is one of those, and they came through and did good work with the people, but they didn't stay for a long time, and there were no really long-lasting communities established among the native peoples here in Michigan until Father Baraga, Bishop Frederic came along. So I think I'm just going to read one more thing and then give you a few minutes to ask any questions if you'd like. Just wanted to read about his death because, holy people die holy death, and there's always a lot that we can learn, from the death of the many holy men and women who have gone before us. So this was somebody who was writing about Bishop Baraga at the time of his death. Says, the long sickness of the beloved prelate, or rather the gradual decline of his vital force, which began to manifest itself very much some years ago and which slowly brought him nearer and nearer to his blessed end, ended with a couple of weeks of great pain. Since New Year, the pious sufferer spent most of his nights sleepless. In the night before Epiphany, severe pains and difficulty of breathing came upon him, so it was considered necessary to administer him the sacraments of the dying. This condition lasted for several days. And that's where in the book Bishop Baraga speaks, and he was very, very sad that, as his health was declining, that he was no longer able to pray the liturgy hours, and he was no longer able to celebrate Mass, and no longer able to go and visit the people of God. And the night before Epiphany, severe pains and difficulty of breathing came upon him, so that it was considered necessary to administer him. I said that. This condition lasted several days. An apparent improvement in health followed, but it was only the forerunner of the gradual extinguishing of the vital force. Still, the dying bishop retained the use of his mental faculties to his last moments, and even when his tongue was unable to articulate, he tried to make known his wishes and orders, partly by writing, partly by signs, in which he succeeded in most instances, though only after great effort. At 2 o'clock in the morning of the 19th of January, 1868, on which day the feast of the Holy Name of Jesus fell in that year, he exhaled his pure soul after an agony of only a few moments. Since he died in the wintertime, they waited to have his, his Mass of the Resurrection celebrating his funeral, and so they wanted to wait a little bit so that some priests could make it, and because it was still winter at the time that they celebrated his Mass, there were only 6 priests who were able to make it here for the celebration of his Mass of Resurrection. So it says here, thus ended a man whose purity of soul and singleness of purpose, whose mortified life and burning zeal, joined to uncommon talents and acquirements, faithfully and successfully employed in the service of God and of the most abandoned of his creatures, a man whose extraordinary achievements as a pioneer of Christianity will not allow his memory to pass away as long as souls capable of appreciating so much virtue and excellence will live in this upper country, which has been the principal field of his labors, and where his body now rests to await the summons for resurrection. So at this point, I'm going to stop. There's so much that I could tell about his life, and in this amount of time I have, there's only so much to be told. But I would encourage you to consider, buying the book or borrowing it. It's a really great book. It just tells so much about his life in really great detail. It's really inspiring. And so I'm going to leave it at that and just give you an opportunity to get any questions or comments you wanted to make to do that before we conclude and then have the next presentation. Yes, Father Corey?
Yeah, we're going to tell us about getting lost in a snowstorm.
Okay, I could do that. Let's see. Maybe it's right here. Yeah, it's right here. Okay. Thanks. So it says, it was towards the end of January during the coldest days and nights of that month. He was on his way homeward after having visited the mining settlements. He stayed overnight in a certain house from this place, the nearest human habitation on his way were 30 miles. Generally, he used to walk that distance in 10 or 12 hours, but this time it came otherwise. During the entire preceding day and during the whole night, it snowed fearfully, so that the snow, which even before was very deep, became a great deal deeper, and the walking so much more fatiguing and difficult. And through this deep snow, he had to travel entirely alone over 30 miles. It was only through a special protection of God that he escaped with his life. He left the house in which he had remained overnight about 7 o'clock in the morning, and then he began to make his way. He soon felt very tired, but kept on walking slowly all day long, making but little progress. About 5 in the evening, he had made but half the way. It was truly horrible. It was evening, night was at hand, and he was 15 long miles away from the nearest human dwelling, all alone. The night was dark and intensely cold. No fire, nothing but a piece of cake to eat, and he ready to sink down in the snow at any moment from exhaustion and weakness. What was the poor priest to do? Either to walk or freeze to death. With a fervent prayer, he recommended himself to divine providence, which had so often before wonderfully protected him, and walked on and on during all that long, dark, and bitterly cold night. At last, at 7 in the morning, he arrived at the house and sank down totally exhausted. Nature could stand the strain no longer. The people of the house were astonished beyond measure at his coming. He had walked 24 hours without resting through the deep snow, with his snowshoes on, and carrying his heavy pack, with nothing to eat but a piece of dry, frozen cake. He says, I could not thank God enough when I arrived at the house. Many a time I thought during the night, which was bitterly cold, that I would sink down and freeze before I would get to the house, and it was really only through the special protection of my loving Heavenly Father that I could hold out in such great hardship. My trust in the help of God under all circumstances of life was even before that very great, but this occurrence has heightened it a great deal more. Anybody else? Anything?
I'm just curious, how old was he when he did that?
How old was he?
Yeah, at that time when he did
Yeah,
that.
let's see if it says anything. So that was in 1849. So I would say he's probably around 50 years old. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So I don't know that many 50-year-olds today could do something like that. Probably not. Yeah. Yes.
Just kind of anecdotally, Bishop Vigeron, when he gave a retreat to the priests at Marygrove a few years ago, and he was telling the story, he said that, because as Father Henry said, he was the titular bishop of Sault Ste. Marie,
Yeah.
and he said at the time he was rector of the seminary, and he said a normal day for him was getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, praying with the seminarians, having breakfast, then running the seminary all day. Then after a quick dinner, he would hop in his car and go out to a parish and do confirmation, and come back home about 10 o'clock at night. He says he would be exhausted.
Yeah.
But he said since he was titular bishop of Sault Ste. Marie, he thought he should read up about Bishop Baraga, and reading the diary of Bishop Baraga and seeing that unlike Bishop Baraga, Bishop Vigeron got to go home to a warm bed and ride in a comfortable car. He said he realized that God was teaching him the lesson that humbly accept the position that you have in life.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, Bishop Baraga traveled all over the Great Lakes area, you know, even when he was assigned to different places. And there was a short time in which he went to the northeastern shore of Lake St. Clair near Detroit to serve, and that's where Bishop Vigeron is from, and that's where my home is, the island, you know, that I live on. So, you know, Archbishop Vigeron also has a connection because Bishop Baraga spent a short time there in the area where he lives. And then before I give this over to Len, I did find the birth date, I don't know why I didn't have it on my notes, but Bishop Baraga was born on June 29th, 1797. So I think at this time that Len was going to come up to speak with us. Is that correct? We're going to take a break. All right.